Hello, everyone, and thank you for virtually joining us today to talk about something we all love, taste. Taste is one of the most universal joys of being a human. It makes our favorite meals memorable, cheers us up when we're feeling low, and brings families and friends together. At the same time, however, taste is an immensely personal experience because everyone's perceptions and preferences are so unique. This topic is especially interesting to me as the co-founder of a vegan recipe channel. When my partner Roxy and I first decided to adopt a vegan diet, we were told it would be bland and boring, but we were thrilled to find that wasn't the case at all. Vegan cooking can be incredibly fun, super simple, and packed with all the flavors we love. We launched So Vegan to debunk the common myths about plant-powered food and to help people understand that a sustainable diet can also be a delicious one. So that's my experience with taste in a nutshell. Yours will likely be very different, but nonetheless, I'm sure it will be shaped by some of the same factors and forces. In this panel, we're going to explore the components that influence the experience of taste. Our panelists today are experts in their respective fields of cooking, food science, and neuroscience. Each brings a unique perspective to the table to help us answer one delicious question: what is taste? Before we get started, let's do some quick introductions with our panelists to give you a better sense of who they are, what they do, and how they contribute to their perspectives on today's topic. First, we have John McIntyre, who is the CEO of Motif Foodworks, a startup developing plant-based ingredients that people actually crave. John is a biochemist who formerly led R&D at PepsiCo and has insight into the science behind all the varied, multifaceted properties of food, including taste. We also share an interest in exploring how taste impacts the adoption of plant-based foods. Next is Dr. Rachel Herz, neuroscientist and leading world expert on the psychological science of smell. She is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at Brown University and part-time faculty in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at Boston College, and a professional consultant. Dr. Herz is a TEDx speaker and has published over 90 original research papers, as well as several popular science books. She's here to share with us the psychology behind taste and how the experience plays out in our brains. Last but by no means least is Dominique Cren, the co-owner and chef of the 3 Michelin-starred restaurant Atelier Cren in San Francisco, where artistry is at the forefront, cuisine is a craft, and the community is an inspiration. Atelier can be defined as a workshop or studio, a concept that drives Chef Cren's modern vision of fine French cuisine. A highly distinctive French heritage and imaginative gastronomic lair behind the stove at Atelier Cren is a clear reflection of her unique life story and her unique perception on the concept of taste. So, as you can imagine, I'm very excited to be joined by these brilliant panelists. So let's get going. I'd like to start by clearly defining the fundamental factors governing our perception of taste and how the science behind taste influences our understanding of food. So Rachel, let's start with you. Why don't you give us an introduction on the basic science behind taste?
Okay, great. Thank you. So taste is actually many things. It is emotions and memories. It's textures. It's what we see. It's what we hear while we're eating. It's flavors and aromas. And my expertise is in how all those things come together. But at the most fundamental level, taste is about how the brain makes flavor. And the brain actually knits together the sensations in your mouth of salty, sour, sweet, and bitter from whatever it is you're eating with the aroma of the food that you're consuming, which is coming from your mouth, entering into your nose as you breathe and eat. And together, that makes the basic experience of what we typically call taste.
Fantastic. So John, sticking with science for a moment, you run a forward-thinking food startup. The science obviously plays a huge role in the development process. So can you explain a little more about sort of how this science impacts the food industry at large?
Yeah, so Motif Foodworks is a food tech company that is focused solely on improving the taste and nutrition of plant-based foods. And to do that, we really believe our goal is to unlock what we call the secrets of food. And that means understanding the science of how food is constructed, how it's perceived when you eat it and when you chew it, and all aspects of the experience of eating food. And for us, understanding the deep secrets of food and how it releases its different aspects allows us to do something that we call rewriting food design rules. So by knowing more about how food works scientifically, we think we can then create foods that people actually crave and that in many cases have improved nutritional factors.
So, John, staying on this topic for a second, we hear a lot in the news about new and innovative food products which are, reinventing the way plant-based foods taste. But I guess what I gather from you is you think that there's sort of still a lot more we can do and a long way we need to go in this particular field.
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, Motif's goal is obviously to become a great company, but we have an environmental sustainability mission too, which is we want to make it so that people can embrace eating more plant-based foods, which is going to be good for the planet, and it's just a really important part of what we have to do living on this earth. But to do that, the products have to taste better. Mainstream consumers to this point are not satisfied with the experience they are having with a plant-based burger or a plant-based cheese or either other plant-based foods. And it's not intuitive to them how they're going to get to products that they really love. So for us, we were trying to figure out how to close the gap in those experiences. And to do that, we really have to understand exactly the aspects of the experience, when you chew, when you eat, how the flavor is released, the textures that it creates. Right now, the textures of plant-based foods are often disappointing to mainstream consumers. And we believe that, and we've got a lot of evidence to show that when we understand how to reconstruct the food in a way that allows those attributes to come through, there is a significant increase in liking. And we do it with natural ingredients, but we do it with a deep insight on how to put them together.
It's fascinating. So it seems like everything from our upbringing to our geography and cultural surroundings, not just science, can change our perception of taste. Dominique, just to you. So how have you seen culture and global difference shape our perception of taste and in turn how food is valued?
Yeah, so I was brought up in France, on the coast of the east west coast of Brittany, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother in the farm. I ate a lot of seafood, and my mother cooking was traditional French. Um, but I had a craving for other flavors that could not be explained. So it kind of opened up my curiosity about taste, and I was adopted at the age of 18 months, and I realized that although my family shaped my childhood and introduced me to new tastes, my DNA was really was ingrained with something different, and I was always curious about other culture and how flavors speak to them, and that's what kind of shaped me as a chef today. I also want to bring up that I have, two 6 years old girls who have been kind of raised on the farm right now. Pandemic or not pandemic, we have a farm up in Sonoma and eat mostly plant-based food, and what has been interesting to also I was going to say study them is their perception of taste is very different from another child that who might eat a lot of meat or carbohydrate. And so what I've learned that and worldwide, I think taste is definitely different for everyone. And Ben, you have about 1.5 million followers, and I'm sure you're getting a lot of different feedback on your recipe and flavors because people are from different part of the world.
No, definitely. It's really interesting hearing you discuss how your upbringing in France has sort of really influenced your perception of taste. Because I guess from my perspective with So Vegan, which is essentially an online platform. You know, everything we create, we share recipes online on social media, and the community we have sort of, to a certain extent, solely exists online. At least that's the way we interact with them. So I'm probably as much influenced by what I go out and see in London and what I've grown up to see in London as much as I am by what I see on Instagram and YouTube, which are both, you know, massively visual platforms. And I think
Right.
this sort of digital perspective has really influenced the style of recipes we create. Because on, you know, one week we'll create sort of curries and stir fries, and the next week we'll create maybe like Middle Eastern recipes or, you know, traditional British recipes that I grew up eating as well. Although not so much those anymore, more so the sort of the more interesting ones that I find. But you know, I think the glue that is holding all of it together for Roxy and myself is the fact that, you know, it's all vegan. That's what we're passionate about. That we're passionate about creating, you know, delicious plant-based food. But beyond that, I think we take inspiration from practically anywhere in the world. So I think, you know, I find it really interesting to think that generations are potentially changing and becoming more influenced by what they see online, at least a lot more so than what happened in the past. And I think as a result, you know, our perception of taste is constantly changing, and we're learning new flavors, new ingredients, new styles of cooking food. And, you know, we're just not held back to a sort of what we can go out and see, but, you know, what we see online essentially. So yeah, Dominique, back to you, I guess. What, you know, growing up in France, but then, you know, running a restaurant in San Francisco, I guess you've had to sort of combine those two cultural influences. And do you think they both influenced you, or do you find inspiration from one more so than the other?
No, they definitely both influence me, and it's also, but they're not just one dimension. What's I've those experiences have taught me that we have to be open, that there is something else out there. So when you learn about where you grow up and the test, and then you are curious with somebody else on other culture test, then you realize there is other tests. So what I do at Atelier Cren, and what I've done through my careers for the 30 years, I've never, I always thought outside of the box. I've never created recipe to just one dimension. I always push myself to be curious to something that perhaps I didn't know. And that helped me to understand perhaps other people liking. And I think when you do that, and when you open yourself up to um, uh, different culture, you are also welcoming a diversity into your own test of like testing food. So it's been a journey of exchange, learning, and developing new flavors that now are definitely the backbone of Atelier Cren. So a lot of people say that some of my recipe is, what do you mean? Why are you mixing all of this? But when they test it, they're like, oh my God, that's really good. So there is something to say there.
Mm, absolutely. So let's take a step back and think about, in addition to culture, there is emotion and memory impacting our taste perception. So Rachel, I'm really keen to know from you, what does the research tell us about the connection between food and emotion?
So, well, the experience of eating is a very emotional one, and it also brings back memories from our past, our childhood, and so on. But what we like is actually fundamentally learned. We, as a function of our past experiences, learned what the comfort foods were, what the foods from our culture was, and those are the foods that we have a primary sort of attraction to. But we can also learn about new foods anytime in our life. So, for example, in your case of So Vegan, if someone hasn't had any vegan food before, and like yourself, maybe they're not very attracted to the whole idea, they can actually learn to have a very positive experience with it, not just from the point of view of the taste, but also from the point of view of the emotional experience of eating it. So, having a community when you're consuming, having fun emotions, having a social environment, which doesn't have to be in person, it can be online as well, can create a really positive connection to the food, and then a really positive connection to what you're eating. So our emotional responses are sort of the primary experience that we have when we're eating it, even at the very basic level of I like it or I don't. That's emotional as well.
Mm.
Mm.
So I have to confess, I have a sweet tooth, and from time to time I kind of return to my childhood sort of favorite desserts, like jammy donuts, for example. So I guess, Rachel, back to you. In terms of comfort food, do you think it's true that often the foods we remember the most from childhood are those we have that kind of strongest emotional attachment to, and sometimes those foods are often the most indulgent as well?
So yeah, that's a great point. So comfort foods tend to give us a warm hug from the past. That's as a function of the nostalgia that they bring with them, and also the fact that they were probably foods that we were served from people who loved us, who were taking care of us and making us feel good. So when we eat them again, we get that emotional response. But you also hit on something else, which is that the ingredients themselves make a difference. And so the fact that they're high in salt, sugar, fat, carbohydrates, unfortunately, Dominique, I mean, it's fabulous that you have daughters that haven't learned that connection, but those are, and they're also in fruits and vegetables too, but especially in the refined sense, they hit the hot spots of reward and pleasure in our brain. And we are wired to find those really appealing because carbohydrates and sugars are the easiest form of usable energy. And from a survival perspective, we need that energy in order to go on and go forward. Today, we're not usually faced with that kind of nutritional challenge. More so, we're faced with the nutritional challenge of eating things that are healthy and also that are appealing, that taste good.
Dominique, is that true, do you think, in terms of, have you potentially found it harder with your children to kind of raise them on a healthier diet, in the sense, I guess to a certain extent it would be easier sort of, cooking more indulgent comfort foods, but go on.
It's interesting. We have to be careful about sometimes what I think about. People think that vegan is we use a healthy, but vegan could be very delicious. And I'm not looking at plant-based or vegan. I'm looking at giving them delicious food. And we grow most of our vegetable, and we give them very nutritious food. So we never think about, we don't deprive them to anything. They have natural sugar, they have natural protein. They don't really see the difference, So, no, I think we feel very good about it. So.
And I'd like to add, just because it's vegan doesn't mean it's healthy either. You can take eat a lot of potatoes fried and drink a lot of beer, and those could all be vegan, and that doesn't make that healthy either. So I mean, the diet in total is what becomes healthy, and we should not just be trying to overclassify some of these things. And the other thing about food that we should not forget is that food's got multiple purpose. Nutrition is a part of it, but food is about pleasure also. I mean, we have Dominique on here. She's the person that makes food really, really pleasurable. But I think she does that as like a scientist. When I heard her talk about developing her recipes, it sounded like the design of an experiment. You had a hypothesis of what would taste good. You designed a series of different versions of that food. You presented it to your customers, and you learned from the customers through observation which ones they loved. That's science.
Right.
It's really exciting to watch you do that.
Yeah, and if I could just add a little bit to what everyone's talking about in terms of pleasure and health. So my motto is everything in moderation, and also to think about the equation of where is pleasure ending and maybe something not so good taking over. So for example, I'm going to talk about indulgent food and say, I really want a slice of chocolate cake. So the first bite of that chocolate cake is fantastic. It feels really good in my mouth. The taste is phenomenal. It's giving me all kinds of good feelings. But by the third, fourth, or fifth bite, maybe it's not so pleasurable anymore. And that's when I have to ask myself, if the pleasure isn't there, what else am I getting from this? If it's not something that I value, maybe I should stop. So this sort of also goes into the idea of being mindful in a very explicit way about what is the experience I'm having while I'm eating? Is it something enjoyable? Is it something valuable? Is this something good for me? Do I want to keep going?
That kind of talks to the whole idea of understanding taste and understanding food and nutrition, to be able to make really good choices by saying, I might want to have a bite or two of something that's a little indulgent. Eating a lot of it is not good for me. But when you're eating that first bite or so, if you really are starting to get into understanding what drives taste, you're going to appreciate the creaminess of that frosting, the release of the cocoa in the chocolate cake or whatever your delight is. I think that, what we're talking about is understanding taste will make that more pleasurable and maybe make it easier for you to understand how to enjoy it without eating so much of it.
Yeah.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Rachel, back to you on this point, because do you agree that to a certain extent, the way people sort of perceive taste is obviously very unique to the individual, right? So, for example, some people might be, I guess I could use the term, wired differently, and they might find it easier to sort of not seek that constant reward, whereas some people might, be wired differently to the extent they will find it easier to kind of stop themselves. So I guess we need to kind of also add context here, which is that, from a food scientist perspective as well, it's kind of hard that you kind of need to create a product and you need to create foods that cater for people who approach foods in completely different ways.
Yes, so you're hitting on a bunch of really good points there. So the first point actually is the degree to which you are sort of someone who's wired for pleasure and also someone who kind of can't stop themselves. So if you're really wired for pleasure and you're someone who has a hard time resisting that, that's potentially going to be something that gives you more difficulty. But the other thing that you just mentioned is the idea of how taste itself varies. So I'm sure people know of the fact that people are what are known as super tasters, tasters, or non-tasters, and that's actually all genetically determined. That doesn't have anything to do with something that you learn. So if depending upon your taste sensitivity, and if you're a super taster, you actually have double the taste buds approximately on your tongue as someone who's a non-taster, and tasters are kind of the Goldilocks in between. But super tasters actually find that a lot of sensation in their mouth is sometimes too much. So they'll prefer things that are a little less creamy, a little less spicy, a little less sweet. And definitely less bitter. So that's actually something that defines, approximately about a third of the population. And then you have people that are on the opposite end who are non-tasters, and they can tolerate a lot more extreme sensations. And in fact, they seek that out because of the fact that they, don't usually get as much bang for their buck depending upon what they're eating. And it's interesting, actually, Dominique, maybe you have something to say about this, but most chefs are actually super tasters. I do know of one chef who is a
I
molecular
am.
gastroenterologist, so who's a non-taster, and he said that it helps him being a non-taster because he kind of comes from the opposite direction. But most chefs are actually super tasters.
But I have a question. Just one question. Where do you, where someone, a human, can test? Do they need to be taught, or this is something that we have in our own DNA? That's a good question. I'm thinking about that.
So the basic taste component, like super taster or non-taster, that's genetic, but I think everything else is taught. So I think that you can learn to like, even if, for example, super tasters do not like spicy sensations very much because it burns. So if I were to just put some chemical in your mouth that produces the sensation of burn from food, like capsaicin, that's the chemical in red peppers that gives you burn, a super taster would be like, oh, this is horrible. But put that in food and have the food in a social context, and that person's probably going to enjoy it very much, as long as it's not too strong. So people learn as a function of their social experiences, their emotional experiences with food, how to like different flavor profiles, even independent of what their genetics are.
Right. Right.
That's really interesting. I think before Roxy and I launched So Vegan, we've always been passionate home cooks, but I think So Vegan really ignited this sort of newfound passion to really study sort of taste and flavor and try to work out all the fantastic combinations you could apply to food. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think Rachel, it's interesting to hear from you that to a certain extent this is genetic, but also there are lots of things we can learn ourselves just by studying this and just being passionate about as well.
Most
John,
of it
over
is
to you
learned.
with food. Most of it is like good. Yeah. So, John, with food being such an emotional part of our lives, do you think this emotional attachment creates a barrier to sort of trying new foods?
Well, I do think, as we mentioned earlier, what you learned as comfort foods and learned experiences often create a standard of what you're always comparing things to. That's why, me personally, if we really want to promote more of a plant-based food diet for people, I think we're going to have to create new food experiences in plant-based food instead of, I mean, my company is trying to help other companies make better plant-based burgers and cheeses and milks. But I think that's this much of the opportunity. I think the bigger part of the opportunity is to make new plant-based foods that might be driven through plant proteins or other ingredients and create new experiences. Because I think hardcore meat eaters it's going to be harder to get them to move over. If we create a new experience that it's not compared to, I think that has a greater opportunity of penetrating into more mainstream consumers. And so I think that is a really critical part of things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And love to
Dominique,
partner with Dominique on doing that for sure.
Oh my God, yes. That's what I want to do.
Definitely, I feel like, especially with plant-based foods, there's just so many opportunities, like you're saying, John, just to sort of, create these new experiences. So I think you're right in a sense, as far as the industry is concerned, there's still a long way we need to go. But I think, if you look at it from an optimistic perspective, the opportunities are definitely there.
Let me give you an example of something we've been toying around with here, which is the product that a lot of people love and a lot of people hate, which is tofu. It's got a texture issue that some people really love, some people really hate. But an extracted bean curd is a quite healthy product, and it's good for the environment. It's not much processed. If we could learn how to change the texture to meet different people's demands or different flavor profiles, and even shape it differently than it is today, could that base of what is a tofu or another bean curd type product be a platform for creating a whole new series of products that create new expectations and new experiences? I think that, to your point, the ingredients are great. I think there's got to be a way to present it to people in a way that makes them like exploring a new experience.
Well, if I could just add to that, that's a really important point with respect to the concept of food. So lobster, by the way, especially in New England, which littered the shores of the beaches here, was considered vermin and only suitable to feed to prisoners and slaves. And in fact, there was an insurrection about how this was cruel and unusual punishment. And today, lobsters are gourmet food and an indulgence and expensive and so forth. And so the idea behind what the food is a huge driver for how people are going to perceive it. If you categorize the food as gross vermin, no, don't eat this, it's like trash food, then, or whatever the case might be, this isn't something that I eat because I'm a meat eater, I'm not going to go there, then it's going to be really hard to climb over that barrier. But if you categorize it as something different, like an indulgence, something really desirable, something that's high end, then you create a whole new set of concepts and you get, I think, a lot of appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are all really interesting points. I think, John, tofu is a fantastic example because one thing we find is there are ways, obviously, you can change the sort of texture and the sort of formation of tofu at home by pressing it, by, for example, freezing it, and then sort of, diluting the liquid that comes out of it to create more kind of fibrous texture. But what we found with So Vegan is that people, and this is the same with us as well, don't necessarily want to spend that much time at home doing these things. So I think the more we can make these ingredients convenient at the point of purchase, the less people have to do at home, the more time they can spend, enjoying the process of cooking. And I think that's really important, that people at home are spending time, sort of not necessarily spending hours in the kitchen, but spending time actually, doing something they love, which is, creating that plate of food and just sharing it with the family.
Mm-hmm.
So Dominique, over to you. I want to dig into this idea of kind of eating with your eyes. So, your food looks incredible, and personally, I would describe you as an artist as well as a chef. So how do you think the visual presentation of food really impacts taste?
Well, first of all, I don't always think of myself, obviously, as a chef. I cook with food to create experiences with people, and I like to create a dish with a lot of different components that each has, they all have really a special meaning, you know. I can give you an example. When I first opened Atelier Cren, I had a dish on the menu called a walk in the forest. And it was kind of for me my chance to create a dish that told a story of my childhood, and the memory of walking through the forest with my father and my brother. And the dish was literally going through the forest, picking up wild mushroom, wild berries, and it was very visual because when you look at it, you felt that you walk into the forest. But the texture and every ingredient that I use was also the layering of flavor and taste that went through your brain and brought you to my world. So I think it's important for me, the visual take you to the time and place where you want to tell that story. And this is what we do at Atelier Cren. I'm not just giving you a plate with food. I'm really transporting you to the time and place where I want to tell you the story. So I think it just play a lot on people also mind. And, you know, someone can come here, don't have the same experience or don't know anything about my childhood, but that might be a story or an ingredient that might also take them to a place in their childhood. And when you do that and you create story and visual, you also invite people to your world that perhaps become their world for a second. And then the rest is history. When they eat the food, then it just create new different layers, and that's how we create taste here and memories and visuals. So I think everything's come together. And I think, Rachel, I think there is connection about visual and taste and smell and texture, I think. And when you all have those components together, you probably create something that it's an amazing experience for me. This is what I think.
Absolutely.
I'm passionate about it.
You're about
Yes,
to make
Dominique,
me
back
cry. She's about to make me cry. You're going to make me cry because I'm thinking about experiences like from my childhood, like with one of my parents, and remember eating a food at a special event, and that just brings back those memories. And the memory of the food is so vivid. Like you can, I can remember the food almost more than I can remember the event.
I mean, I have to tell you a story. So we serve a dish here at Atelier Cren, and it's called the grain and seed, and it was just like a broth and grain and seed. And there is this lady. She was from Russia, and then she was crying at the table. And I went to see her. I was like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I don't know, but like I'm eating this food, and I didn't grow up with it, but it reminded me of eating with my grandmother in Russia when she was doing this broth and this soup." And it's just like, there is a connection there. And when you create that connection with taste and memories, and you tell a story, and the story is connected to perhaps somebody's story, it's incredible, you know? And I don't know, I'm just going to cry right now.
Well, aroma is the most evocative of emotion and memory of any of our sensory experiences, and flavor, which is aroma plus taste, is the same. So I completely understand that experience of that person feeling transported to their childhood with their grandmother and the overwhelming emotion that comes with that. The emotion is actually the primary sensation that we have when we smell something. It is because the part of the brain that processes emotion is the same part of the brain that processes smell. So unlike any of our other senses, we have this really unique and deep connection to the emotional quality, much more so than to the linguistic or the descriptive and so forth. So it's this really deep personal experience we have when we have flavor and we have aroma, just what eating
So
is.
Rachel, does that also work with aversion? I can remember hearing that if you got sick and you were eating a certain kind of food, that memory essentially triggers you to almost get sick when you eat that again. It takes years and years of not eating that food to be able to reintroduce it without getting sick. I think that's true, right? I think I've heard that.
Yeah, it's called a learned taste aversion, although it's really flavor and it's really based on smell because you don't have an aversion to all things that are sweet or all things that are salty. You have an aversion specifically to that one dish. And it's actually adaptive because if what you'd eaten was poison, you don't want to repeat the mistake and eat it again. But for things that it was just sort of an accidental coincidence, like you happened to get a stomach flu on the same night as you had some new food, let's say, or even a food that you've been eating before, as a function of the fact that you got sick connected to eating it, you were going to avoid that food for years and years. And I have a personal experience with pepperoni pizza that's like that. And it's taken actually my husband taking me to a zillion Red Sox games at Fenway and finally getting me to have a slice of pizza again, that I've kind of gotten over the aversion, at least when I eat it. But when I think about it, it's still, not my cup of tea to have a slice of pepperoni pizza.
Dominique, it's really fascinating to hear your sort of perspective on sort of storytelling behind food. And one question I really want to ask you is, do you think, one from the perspective of So Vegan, we're kind of fascinated in trends, so we're really interested in kind of learning about what kind of foods are really taking off on social media. What formats people are using to really display the food as well. So, I guess my question to you would be: do these stories that you sort of create with your food, are they kind of timeless in the sense, this plate of food will still be on your menu and it will look exactly the same in 10 years' time, or you having to constantly kind of adapt and find new ways to kind of tell that story?
Well, it's all about evolution. If I have the same menu on that I had 10 years ago, then I will be very stagnant. No, it's we evolve every month, every year, and it's also traveling and meeting people and getting new experiences also allow us to create a new story at Atelier Cren. I can tell you, I think when I opened Atelier Cren, I think I was trying to really think about my own story and the experiences that I had, through my childhood with my parents and so forth. And when I, for the last few years, especially, last year, I really refocused on the time and place where I was, I am, which is California. And I start to learn a lot of this story and test and meet different culture here. And literally our menu is really based on this story that we have the last years here. So it's always an evolution. And it's very important to be able to evolve because the world is evolving, a customer are evolving. And I don't want to give them the same thing that I gave them, 10 years ago. I want them to come here and come back and to have new experiences. And that's what is so important, to be able to be open to new tests. And I don't like the word trend, because I think trend, it's hard for me to use the word trend. I like like the word, evolution. And changing in a way that you're changing in a way because you want to learn something else,
Mm.
So,
learning
Dominique, can I
from
ask a question?
the past. Yeah.
I just have a quick question. What if I'm a customer and I was there 10 years ago at Atelier Cren and I come back and I want to have that experience I've been thinking about? I've been having this memory for the past 10 years. What do you do for me?
What do I do for you? Well, I will ask you to trust me and to bring you to make you comfortable and allow me to give you an experience that perhaps that will remind you of the experience you had before, but in a new way of doing it. So
Good.
when you come to me, you got to trust me,
Okay.
but I will definitely perhaps remake maybe a dish. But I think it's important to what we're trying to create here. What you had, the experience. I have people that come through the years to Atelier Cren, and I have this customer that's been coming literally 3 or 4 times a year for the last 10 years. 3 or 4 times, a year for the last 10 years. And what he had 10 years ago and what he had now is like, wow, I've never been disappointed And thank you so much for opening me up to new experiences. And I think that's important. And I think that's what John was saying, saying that experiences are very important. And that's who we are, and that's why I want to continue to be as a chef.
But I think even within new experiences, there are design cues in the food that get connected to other experiences. So
Right.
it won't be like a revolution. You're going to see either flavor or texture attributes that you like and that connect to different things. And I think, and ingredients that you know and love. So it's evolution isn't like we're here and now we're way over there. It's we're here and now we're maybe a little over here and now we're a little over here. So that's what evolution is. It's moving slightly over those different things. And to your point, 10 years later, this customer went from here all the way to here, didn't realize it was kind of moving and trying new things, right?
Yeah.
Mm. Rachel, what does the science tell us in terms of, do we get bored of having the same thing over and over again? Like, do we kind of crave these new experiences when it comes to taste? Because on the other hand, I still kind of, like I was mentioning earlier, enjoy those foods that I grew up sort of, eating as a child. But at the same time, I feel like I'm programmed to kind of experience new things. So I'm curious, kind of what the science says in that sense.
So the science actually says that we crave what we eat. So if we are, someone who has a certain, let's say, chicken wings in their diet on a frequent basis, then you're going to crave chicken wings because that's, something that's in your diet. Maybe it's something that's a bit more indulgent, but it's something that you will want because it's something that you eat. In fact, there was a kind of a shocking study done with the nutritional supplement called Sustacal, which is one of those, complete nutrition drinks. And people were forced to have all their meals of just Sustacal for a whole week. And during that time, cravings for other food were recorded. But then after the study, people were asked again what kinds of foods they were craving prior to the study. And during the study, no one ever said Sustacal. But after the study, some people actually said they were craving Sustacal. So the idea is that we do crave what we are consuming. But then it also happens to be that certain foods from our past will be things, even if they were special foods, we haven't had them for a long time, we'll crave them again. But to create cravings for new things, we have to create the idea that we want the new thing. So I think that what's really important is to have the idea be exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's where
I was just having a question about craving I want to ask you, so a woman that is pregnant often craves something that they never craved before. So where that come from?
So that actually seems to be more folklore or anecdote. It hasn't been studied in any systematic way with respect to specific foods, but it has been studied with respect to taste and smell. So one thing that happens when you're pregnant actually is your sensitivity to bitter increases a lot. And that's important because bitter things, other than the healthy leafy greens in nature, are often spoiled or poisonous. And so when you're pregnant, you want to make sure that you're not consuming poisons because that would be very dangerous. So bitter taste sensitivity increases. It turns out, however, that aroma, even though a lot of women say, especially in first pregnancies, that their sense of smell is super, super strong, the sensitivity per se hasn't changed, but their attention to smell has really changed. And I think that there are so many things psychologically going on when you're pregnant, especially first pregnancies, that the idea about certain foods can become either repulsive just because of it in your own head or really desirable. And you might crave all kinds of strange things and then be really anti-eating a bunch of other things that you used to enjoy. And I would say that that's primarily psychological and all the things that are going on in your mind while you're pregnant, and less so to do with the actual taste per se.
Yeah, and so back to Ben, your point about going back to craving what you like and then creating a new experience. I think some of that goes back to the whole idea of eating with your eyes and creating a new experience. Think about the design attributes of the packaging and the presentation, and then how it looks on the plate. All of those things are really a great way to start getting people to be attracted to a new opportunity. So that's when all that visual cues really make a difference. And then to Rachel's point, right after the visual cue comes the aroma cue. And if you can get those two together, you can start moving people to new experiences. I think that's a real critical piece.
So, John,
Well,
from a plant-based perspective, sorry.
I was
No,
just
go
going
on.
to say, even the color of the plate changes how you might taste something. So by the color of the plate, if it makes something look pinker or redder, people could actually perceive that as being sweeter than it would be if the
Exactly.
plate made people perceive it, let's say, a bluer plate, and that might conjure thoughts of being more salty. So visual things can be both the attractiveness, the plating, can actually also change the perception of taste itself.
That's good.
Yeah, it clearly works in beverages. Red beverages people perceive as much sweeter than others, for sure.
Right. Right.
John, I was going to ask you, from a plant-based perspective, do you think it's the controversy at the moment, I guess, is kind of naming plant-based foods the same as you would name like a beef burger or a pork sausage, for example? To what extent do you think it's important that people have that familiar kind of name associated with a product if it has that familiar taste? Or do you think the plant-based kind of industry needs to maybe reinvent new terms and new, I guess, experiences to kind of get people into the foods?
So I'm probably assuming that one of my advisors is going to watch this, who has been constantly telling me that that is a big deal to get people to name these things differently. Because if you have a burger eater and you keep telling them that that is a burger and it's not going to meet we always call it the concept of a burger, but it doesn't create the fulfillment of what your experience is expecting. But I think it's going to be different for different people and different types of consumers or people, what they're trying to get out of it. If you're a vegan and your idea of a patty that goes on a sandwich is veggie forward with protein, but it's not burger like, you'll probably be happy being it renamed something else. But if you're trying to get another consumer that says, look, I love burgers and I think I'll be willing to eat a plant-based burger if it gets closer and closer, then you're probably going to use naming clues that connect to what their expectations are. Like, I think there's a big tent, and we should try to be able to accommodate everybody under that big tent. I think what we're going to find is different people will like different cues on naming, and it depends what you're trying to get out of it. I think all of that is a possibility, and I don't know that we have to judge it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't got long left, but I want to squeeze in another question. John, back to you. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest misconceptions, I should say, about taste? I guess from a food industry perspective.
Wow. Where do you start? Well, I think one of the ones is, do people change their preferences? And the answer is yes, they do. It's learned, it takes time. And I think one of my great examples is from my past is the people that drink beverages. And let's use the soda as an example. Most people drank full sugar sodas, and then a new generation of people came up and started moving over to diet beverages. And when they started drinking those, lower calorie diet beverages, they noticed the change different, but they then adapted to that new lower calorie type of taste. It's a different taste profile completely. If you then give them a full sugar soda, oh my gosh, this is all terrible sweet. So I think one of the biggest perception issues, and I wish I had a more positive example of a food. I mean, nothing wrong with a beverage, but I think we can get people to adapt to new tastes. And I think it is an important part of not getting forced into just the same food products. So taste can evolve. I love how Dominique talks about evolving in lots of ways. I think people's ability to taste and go after different things evolves. I think that's critical.
Sure. And Rachel, over to you. The same question, I guess, from a science perspective, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to taste?
Well, I would say the biggest misconception is thinking that it all comes from your tongue. And really, most of it is coming from your nose. So, for example, if you could not smell, bacon would just taste like salt. And apart from the texture, you wouldn't be able to tell it from something else. So if you had an apple and a potato and you couldn't smell, you would not know what you were eating if your eyes were closed. And you can try this at home. Just plug your nose and eat something, and then release your nostrils, and you will get a huge surprise at how much sensation is brought by smell, which is what creates flavor. The other really interesting part of that is when you can smell, the taste itself gets stronger. So if it's sweet, the sweet gets stronger with the smell. So the intensity of the experience of eating is really, really a lot about smell, which people don't realize.
Just to add on to that, I also think that all the different components that lead up to the experience can cloud each other. And I have an example from just last week here in our labs. We were tasting some plant-based patties or burgers, whatever we want to call them. And we had 2 different flavor systems. And I kind of was looking at the first wave, and I was commenting that, I think the texture is not quite right either. And then the next product came in, and the flavor attributes and the appearance were better. And I immediately prescribed better texture to that product. I guarantee you I was confused. The texture was probably the same. Because I think we can't always separate all the different components. And, we haven't talked a lot about texture. Texture, to me, is one of the biggest issues with food, is that texture, immediately people have an expectation higher about texture. And when they don't get it, it's one of the most dissatisfying things people get is, the texture's off. So I think that's another component we should be thinking about.
100%, definitely. One thing I'd also add at this in this point is, I think from a home cooking perspective, we often, especially with plant-based food, we have this perception, or there is a perception, that it can be quite complicated. And I think one thing we try to do with So Vegan is really try to inspire people to cook with minimal ingredients, with really simple methods, and just to kind of go back to the basics. So for example, with our first book, all the recipes are achievable with only 5 ingredients. So we really try to hone in on those kind of fantastic flavor combinations, and trying to take like tomato and basil and pea and mint and just reinvent them in a new way, and cook them in a new way, present them in a new way, to kind of inspire people to get in the kitchen and, use those simple cooking methods to achieve really big flavor and tasty results. So we're coming to the end of this panel. So thanks so much to everybody. I just want to close by asking you, you all work in very different fields, but obviously it's all related to food. So why is it so important for everyone to have a better understanding of taste, and what's ultimately on the line if we don't have a healthy curiosity of taste? Dominique, I'll start with you.
Well, so taste is everything, in our emotion and ours, and build who we are today. That is all for me. And I think we need to put so much more, I think, into science and understanding, I think, how taste affect us as human. I think that's very important. And I'm going to, praise, the work that Motif is doing, help us to build, I think, a better planet, which is number one also, and to care for ourselves. So yeah, taste is everything. And also taste is such a meaningful aspect of our life, and to understand it better, it's so important for the advancements in the food industry today. So that's kind of my take on it. So.
Very well said. Rachel, how about you?
Well, I think, as you said at the beginning, eating is one of the great pleasures of being human. And in order to both have it be pleasurable, valuable, nutritious, sustainable, we have to understand what it is that we are tasting. And so it's a fundamental key to both our future of food consumption, but more than that, the future of the planet.
Definitely. And John, I'll leave it to you to say the final words.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is right now my brain is swirling with how can I develop a project here at Motif where I can work with Rachel and Dominique on together, because that would be awesome.
We are.
Yeah, we will for sure. So I want to make it simpler. I think you appreciate when you decide you like something and you learn more about it. I think that you create greater appreciation. You know, yeah, you ever notice when somebody like decides they like wine and then they start reading about it and learning about it and they want to talk about it and they want to call this, you know, it's fruit forward. It's this. I think there is a component of learning and understanding the underneath of it, like cooking, like other food, that creates a greater appreciation. And when you have a great appreciation for food, I think what we end up really understanding and thinking more about the importance of that food, where it came from, what it does to me, me personally. And if all of us spent more time thinking about that, our health would be better. And if we thought about how it was made and developed, our environment would be better. And geez, if we just could get better on that, that would be awesome.
Right.
Definitely. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much to all of the fantastic panelists, John, Rachel, and Dominique. To everyone watching at home, I really hope you've enjoyed our panel, What is Taste? It's an incredibly exciting time in the food industry right now, and hopefully this panel has given you a deeper appreciation of how taste forms such an integral part of our lives. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Au revoir.